Amazing. Thank you to those of you just joining us. I'm going to get started just because we've got a lot to cover today. Welcome to our final masterclass of the year. This one is all about private wealth, private client law. We've got Alice and Martha here with us today just to chat all about their experience in this area of law, their route into this area of law, life as a trainee, work-life balance, and lots more. You can ask your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom, so please do make most of that, and I'll be posing these throughout the masterclass, so get your questions in early. Before we get started, I just wanted to outline the learning outcomes for this masterclass. So hopefully by the end of this session, you should know a bit more about how to break into this particular practice area. You should know what the work of a private client solicitor involves and know the key issues facing this area at the moment. We've also got some house rules just to share really quickly. So as I said a second ago, please do make the most of the online question tool to post any questions that you have, and I'll be posing them to the speakers throughout the masterclass. If you have any audio or visual problems throughout the masterclass as well, please use this tool for that, and we will do our best to help you there. Please note that the masterclass will be recorded, and the recording of this session will be sent to all registrants, and it will be available on our YouTube channel shortly as well. Post about the masterclass on social media, use the hashtag LCM Masterclass if you would like to. And then finally, we have more masterclasses coming up in the new year, so please do check out the Law Careers Net events page for all the masterclasses that we're running. Our next one is on Wednesday, 22nd of January, and is designed to provide non-law students with the information they need to kickstart their career in law. Before we get started, I'm just going to launch some polls. So just to get an idea of who's joined us here today. 1 second. Okay, so first one. So what stage are you at? I'll just give you a few seconds just to fill that in. So we've got majority postgraduate and second or third year law student, and then we've got a few who are in work, non-law students, and one first year law student as well. And then I would like to just find out how much you already know about this area of law as well before we get started. So absolutely nothing, a little, a lot, or are you an expert? Perfect. So we've got majority saying they know a little, and then a few people saying they know absolutely nothing as well. But that's great because that's why we're here today. Okie dokie. So first up, I would love it for our panelists here just to introduce themselves. So Alice, if we start with you first, and then we'll come to Martha.
Hello everyone, my name is Alice Mason. I'm a senior associate at Macfarlanes. I've been here for about 3 years, and I am one of the odd people that always wanted to be a private client lawyer. So you don't meet many of us. We normally just sort of accidentally stumble across the work and decide actually this is quite a good crack. But I've always wanted to do it, so I'm unusual.
Amazing, thank you. And Martha?
Hi everyone. I am a trainee solicitor currently doing a seat in the private client department. So I studied law with French law as an undergraduate degree, and then worked for a while as a paralegal and decided that I really enjoyed working in a law firm. So applied to Macfarlanes via the direct training contract application route rather than through doing a VAC scheme. And I started my training contract in September 2023. So this is my third seat. My first seat was in litigation, and my second seat was in tax and rewards. So I can give you a little bit of an indication of how private client as a seat to do as a trainee compares to other seats, and also kind of what the experience is like for a trainee.
Amazing, thank you both so much. So first up, I think it would be useful, Alice, just to have a kind of an overview of what private wealth means. So what do lawyers mean when they talk about private wealth?
the answer to that is possibly not as simple as you might expect, in that private wealth means different things to different people, and to different firms. So to me, private wealth means the sort of wider group of sort of practice areas where you would expect to see private individuals. So, for example, family law, which is divorce and children disputes, that sort of thing. Private client, which is what specifically Martha and I do, which focuses more on things like tax, trusts, succession, wills, lasting powers of attorney. And then I would also include in that bracket things like trusts and wills or estates disputes, as well as things like residential property. Private wealth can also encompass things like private capital, which generally refers to more the corporate side of things. But usually when someone says private wealth, they're referring to private client, which is what we do.
Thank you. And what was it that attracted you to this private wealth at Macfarlanes?
Well, I didn't start at Macfarlanes, I started at a different firm, but the reason I did private client law specifically was because I was one of these odd people that did I did a degree in law and French, and actually found most of the courses slightly tedious until I got to my third year, and I really loved trusts law. As I said earlier, you won't hear many people say that. Most people think it's awful and archaic, but I absolutely loved it. I still do. Macfarlanes, but the reason I came to Macfarlanes was because they've got a big team with it's sort of a partner-led firm, and you get a lot of experience working directly with clients and partners. You're part of a huge team. Everybody's sort of specialized, but in almost everything. There's obviously some partners who focus more on one thing than another, but everybody does everything, and everybody works with everybody else, which I think is great when you're learning to be able to work with different personalities, different work styles, and obviously loads and loads of different clients. I mean, within the private client market, Macfarlanes is one of the bigger teams, and I think that presents a lot of opportunities for learning, especially at the more junior level. Now I'm a senior associate now, but for me, the 3 years here have been an enormous learning curve, a very enormously steep learning curve, and I think Macfarlanes is one of the best places to learn, especially with all the changes going on, which I'm sure everybody will have seen in the news with the budget and so on. It's an interesting time to be a private client lawyer.
Thanks, Alice. And do you find that it, just for the benefit of the people on the call, would you say private client is a specific practice area, or is it a sub-specialisation, or does that depend on where you are?
Slightly it will depend on where you are, but I think generally speaking, private client will come under the bracket of private. Well, private client can be narrowed down to things like tax, trust, and successions, generally speaking. So it is its own practice area, I think. Not most firms, most city firms won't have a private client team, but most mid or small firms will have a private client team, because it's one of those areas of law that applies to everybody. Everybody dies and everybody pays tax, and those are the things that we deal with, generally speaking. Planning for succession purposes, planning for tax purposes. That's where we step in, as well as things like mental capacity and that sort of thing.
Thank you. And Martha, just from a trainee point of view, could you just outline what a typical day might look like for you, the sorts of people you interact with, meetings you're involved with, that sort of thing?
Yeah, of course. So it can be very varied, which I really enjoy, and it very much depends on the matters that you will be working on and the people that you'll be working with. But to give you an overview of the kind of matters that you would be working on and the kind of tasks that you would be doing. For example, one thing that I've been helping with recently has been an individual who is a kind of entrepreneur, started a business, or was one of the founders of a business kind of 20-30 years ago, and helped build it up to a point where they're now kind of really successful and thinking about what's going to happen in the future. So we were assisting this individual with preparing their will and thinking more generally about how that estate planning is going to work for the next generation. So there was a bit of a work setting up trusts, and in terms of the documents that you would actually be helping with, often as a trainee you would be preparing the first draft of a document like a will or a trust deed, and you will be doing it based on a precedent, but obviously every single client is different and they have their own expectations. So very often you will be discussing a matter with someone and they will say, okay, well, we've got a precedent for this, or there's an example of this specific thing that we did in a matter 3 years ago, but actually I haven't come across this specific request before. So you might need to go away and do a little bit of research about it, or go and speak to someone else in the team, because I haven't done it, but I know that this partner did have a client who wanted a similar thing a few years ago. So in that sense, the work that you're doing is very collaborative, and there's a lot of knowledge in the team that you can access, both in terms of documents that have been prepared on previous matters, but also just people's own wealth of experience, which I'm still coming to terms with because it is just so impressive. But getting back to their kind of standard day. So the clients that we deal with in private client tend to enjoy kind of the face-to-face contact, because a lot of the work that you're doing is personal to them, and they want to meet the people who are doing that work, and quite a lot of the information that you're discussing with them will be sometimes quite sensitive, especially when you're talking about kind of estate planning. You're talking about scenarios where someone's kind of ill and incapacitated, or where they're dying. You have to kind of mostly have those conversations in person. So as a trainee, one of the common things that I will be doing is attending a meeting to take a note of it. So you get to meet the client. Admittedly, I would say, and thankfully, I don't necessarily speak very much in those meetings beyond kind of pleasantries, and yeah, that's pretty much it. But you're in the room with the client and you're hearing, often a partner will be giving advice off the cuff, and it's so interesting to hear that. Preparing notes of those meetings, which are really important to have on file, preparing first drafts of any documents that are coming out of that, and helping with research on areas of law, both in terms of tax analysis and tax legislation, and also in the trust law context, which can be really varied and can be very niche, which is very interesting. So yeah, have I written anything else down? I don't think, and I think that is a pretty decent summary of what you would be doing as a trainee.
I'd say so, for sure. I think it's like all about soaking all that information in, isn't it, and making the most of those opportunities when you are sat in those meetings as well. Alice, just on the client front, who are without going into specifics, who are the types of clients that you work with, and is it quite like a broad spectrum?
It is a broad spectrum. You sort of get all sorts, really. I'd say Macfarlane specific, our clients tend to be entrepreneurs, people that have built up their businesses and need help with several different aspects of their private life and their business life. So you would, for example, be helping with business succession planning, as well as personal taxes, where people decide to move abroad or come to the UK, that sort of thing. We also then have your sort of entrepreneurs in my mind is someone who started their own business and built it up from there. You've then got the sort of other side where it's someone who's worked in business or worked in whatever it might be and made their wealth that way. You do see inherited wealth, family office, sometimes sort of landed estates type clients. We do also have, for example, lots of non-UK clients, really lots of non-UK clients, including various royals from around the world, family offices from around the world, huge families based in Hong Kong or huge family based in Canada or whatever it might be. And then the sort of different generations of the family. So whoever made the wealth at the start, and then children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren sometimes. We also have quite often trustees, corporate trustees, or trustees that are not corporate trustees, so individual trustees who act for big family trusts. And then, as I mentioned, family offices. So I have matters where we deal specifically with the family office rather than the family themselves. And the family office run the trust structures or the corporate structures or whatever it might be. And then we often have people like intermediaries, so private banks. And what else? Yeah, I'd say those are generally the sort of main clients. Lots of individuals, but also lots of trustees, family office businesses, that sort of thing.
Thank you. And we've just had a question in from one of the attendees asking, what is a corporate trustee?
So a corporate trustee is where using an example of a family that I help, the patriarch of the family made a lot of money several generations ago, and trusts are usually set up for estate planning, tax planning, or asset protection purposes, where you have a trust that is based in an offshore jurisdiction. So, for example, this family are not UK based. Their trusts are all based out of Bermuda, which is quite common. You also see them in places like BVI or Cayman or the Channel Islands, just because those places have got good trust law, good history in trust law, and the courts are familiar with trusts. You will often, because the families are not based in those jurisdictions, you will have corporate service providers or fiduciary service providers who will act as trustees of those trusts and help do the administration. They'll do the reporting, or ultimate beneficial ownership, and all of these things that you have to do now for compliance purposes, money laundering reporting, all of that. It's basically where a service provider, and there are lots of sort of big names in each of those jurisdictions that do this as their entire business model. They will basically act as the trustee or the guardian of the corporate structure or the trust on behalf of a family who usually doesn't live in that jurisdiction.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And while we're on clients, Martha, you touched on this briefly earlier when you were talking about heading into meetings with clients. But how much client contact do you have? What are the kind of opportunities like there?
Yeah, so I touched on this briefly. In terms of the client contact, the direct kind of relationship that you might be able to build with the client, I would say your opportunities are a little bit more limited than you might have in other more corporate seats. Say, for example, if you were a trainee in a corporate department and you're dealing with a big organization who have a big legal team or whoever it is at that client entity that you're dealing with, there will be lots of employees kind of at a bit more of a junior level where it makes more sense for it to be the trainee who is going back and forth and asking for the extra document and getting the signatures and whatnot. So you might, I haven't done a corporate seat yet, but my understanding from those of my cohort who have is that they will have much more of that direct relationship, the back and forth, the phone calls, the emails, to clients directly. And by clients, we mean employees of the entity that is our named client. In that sense, in private client, the end client, the person who is ultimately benefiting for the advice is an individual, and usually like you are very unlikely to have that kind of direct relationship with that individual because like they're like the very important person who mostly, for example, deals with the partner, and it's the partner's job to be building that relationship, and you will learn those skills from the more senior people in the team by witnessing their interactions in in-person meetings or in video calls or via email, because you will be copied into the correspondence, and quite a lot of the time you will be preparing a first draft of that correspondence, say an email to the client with advice, explaining, last week we talked about this and you asked these follow-up questions, here are the answers, providing a little bit of legal analysis. Often you will be preparing the draft of that correspondence and you will see it, but you will not be sending it directly, because as a trainee, like in a law firm, everyone has their role, and as a trainee, your role is not to be building those direct relationships. And I have to say, I'm glad I do not have that responsibility yet, because it comes with time, and it's one of the things I think that makes private clients so interesting. and that I can see it being a really interesting career beyond working as a trainee in, because you have that scope to be building those personal relationships, because you're advising on personal issues, not just legal ones. There is much more scope to work on those personal skills than you would if, for example, your client was a big corporate with lots of employees where there's a big turnover and that kind of thing. So not an amazing amount of direct personal contact, but a lot of indirect kind of exposure to it, which I think is really helpful at trainee level.
That sounds great, thank you. And it sounds like something you need to work up to anyway.
Exactly.
Perfect, thanks, Martha. Alice, you mentioned earlier about the broad spectrum of clients. How international is the actual work that you do?
At Macfarlanes, it's almost entirely international. So whether that's because the clients are not based in the UK or are not from the UK and haven't just moved here, or whether that's because they are based in the UK and from the UK, but they have children who have moved abroad or whatever it might be, almost all of our work has an international element. I would say the majority, if not the vast majority of our clients are not from the UK, or have been here for 25 years, but it started off in Canada or Australia or whatever it might be. But because of the sort of nature of the world, as it were, it's an international world that we all live in now. There's almost always an international point. I've got clients where, chap has 3 children and they're all from different jurisdictions. One lives in Switzerland, one lives in France, one lives in the US, and that brings up a whole host of different international issues that we need to grapple with for, what happens when he dies? What are the implications in the US? What are the implications in France? What are the implications in Switzerland? Or what happens if they move somewhere else? What happens if they get married? What if they get married in France and there's a different regime for the marriage? We do have some very, well, not many, and it tends to be a few sort of specific people that deal with the UK work, but there are a few solely UK based clients. But it tends to be the case that there is a link to the UK, and that is how we have come across the client. So, for example, they have trusts that have English law, that are governed by English law, or there's a dispute in London for whatever reason, so we get involved because of that. One of the beneficiaries lives here, someone wants to send their children to school here, or they want to move to London, they've got a London property, whatever it might be, or it could also just be that there's a UK limb of a business. So yeah, almost everything has an international element. It's almost more rare to have a solely UK matter. I can think of maybe one that I've worked on in the 3 years that I've been here. Yeah, almost all international.
Great, thank you. And then with that, are there any opportunities to go on to comment? Do you know?
There have been in the past. I think in the past, not at trainee level, generally speaking, it's usually at more senior level. It's more senior associate, probably more senior than me. I'm 6 years qualified. There hasn't been one for a couple of years. I think COVID put a bit of a stop to them, and I think there's talk of them coming back, but there hasn't been one for a while. But there have in the past been opportunities to be seconded. People have gone to the US, people have gone to Geneva, people have gone to Bermuda, I think, and then there are also secondments to clients or intermediaries in London as well.
Great, thank you. And then Martha, so far in your seat, how have you found the kind of the workload? Do you find that there have been busy periods, or is it fairly steady?
So I would say as a broad generalization, my experience of private client is that it's a little bit more steady than, for example, litigation, which tends to, when you're working in litigation, you will have court deadlines that are strict and set in advance, and that you will then be working really, really hard in the run up to a deadline. Say we've got to file a witness statement on Friday, so you will have a few kind of days of chaos in the run up to that, and then there will be a bit more of a lull, after that deadline has been met, and then there will be kind of a big build up to the next one. In that sense, private client is different and more steady in that you do have deadlines that, you know, for various reasons you will be wanting to stick to, but they're not court mandated, or they're not on a transaction timetable like you might have in a corporate seat. So it tends to be a little bit more steady in that sense, but you have different difficulties to overcome. So in a private client department, say your workload for the next 2 weeks might be some research tasks, some notes of advice, some drafts of some documents, and the timelines for each of those individual tasks might be slightly less urgent, but you might be doing them for kind of 5 different partners. So you have to develop the skill of being able to manage lots of people's expectations at once, and be able to have lots of bigger tasks that are ongoing and that you need to juggle with all of the others. So it's definitely a skill that you have to learn as a trainee. And just to say also, in terms of busy periods, whilst there isn't kind of court set deadlines or transaction timetables that you're sticking to, quite a lot of the work that we do is kind of based on kind of tax changes. The tax legislation is one of the areas of legislation that is changed the most. It's a policy area. It's really interesting if you are interested in working in an area of law that is very heavily impacted by kind of public policy. It's something that you should really consider looking into more, because something like, and Alice mentioned earlier, the budget on the 30th of October, there was a lot of work that we were doing in the run up to that budget, because we were expecting the government to announce changes to some areas of taxation on that day, and they didn't end up announcing some changes that took effect from that day. And the majority of changes to various areas of taxation are going to be coming into effect at the end of this tax year. So quite a lot of the work that we're doing is with that end of tax year in mind. So I believe, Alice, correct me if I'm wrong, I have not experienced a work running up to the end of the tax year yet, but I understand that period can be a little bit manic. And I think there is a celebration once that is over on kind of the 6th or 7th of April.
Yep, that is right.
Perfect. We've spoken a bit about the work and the clients, but how, Alice, how do firms actually generate work for the firm in this area? What does that involve?
I think different firms take different approaches to this. Macfarlanes is a partner-led firm, and so it tends to be the case that the work is generated by the partners going out and meeting intermediaries, meeting clients, attending events, attending conferences, speaking at conferences, that sort of thing. Because of the nature of the firm, that, as I say, that tends to be the partners, and the work therefore tends to filter in sort of top down. That is not, I think, the case in all firms, but that's how it works here. And also, it tends to be the case that clients and intermediaries will just recommend certain partners or certain, firms to their clients and their intermediaries. So there is a sort of almost natural progression, a sort of word of mouth. If you work with a client and they're happy with you, they might mention to their friends, or their colleagues, or whatever it might be. There's less, not none, but less business development. I think at the more junior end of the spectrum here. Although there are, of course, plenty of events and plenty of Christmas parties and so on that you get invited to, which is always good fun. But it tends to be more partner focused, and we obviously do things like host seminars. For example, there was a private client focused seminar or webinar that the partners ran after the budget, because of all the changes that had been announced, which are specifically relevant to our clients. Mainly that sort of thing.
Great, thank you. And then we've spoken about like the level of work and the ebbs and flows and that sort of thing, but I wondered if both of you could just kind of touch on, just to get your different points of views on this, how it works managing your work-life balance in the world of private client law, and the support that's perhaps in place at Macfarlanes itself. So Martha, maybe come to you first from a trainee's point of view.
Yeah, of course. One thing I will say, quite a lot of the work in this practice area is very technical. It requires a lot of brain power, and it's one of the reasons that I enjoy it. You know, you're reading through really complicated legislation, and you're dealing with very abstract trust law concepts, and in that sense it's very academic, but it requires you to be kind of fully focused, and I promise this is linked to work-life balance. You have to be really switched on to do a proper job, and there is definitely a culture, and I don't know if this is the case in private client departments in other firms, but at Macfarlanes in particular, there is an expectation that the quality of the work that we are producing will be as good as it possibly can be, and that comes before getting it done, you know, tonight for the sake of it being done today. And that, I think, really feeds into the approach to work-life balance in the department, in that if it is 8 p.m. and you've been working really hard all day and your brain is absolutely fried, and the last thing on your list that needed to be done today was a really big note of advice, that is going to take kind of hours of really detailed work, there is basically no one in the department that would want you to kind of force yourself to keep working and to make your brain do it when your brain is telling you that it's not going to be very good, because the focus is on the quality of what you're producing rather than it being done tonight for the sake of it being done tonight. So what I'm saying is, deadlines are a little bit more flexible, and it is much, much healthier, and you are going to be producing much better work if you are talking to people and saying, look, I know we've said that we'll do this today, but I'm not going to do my best work right now. So is it okay if you review this tomorrow and we send it to the client on Friday instead of Thursday? And in almost all cases, that will be absolutely fine. And it's one of the things that I have found much nicer about this job, and even at trainee level, where kind of what you're doing is possibly slightly less technically difficult than what the associates are doing, you still get to a point in the day where you're like, anything I do beyond the next half an hour is not going to be any good, so I might as well just give it a rest for today and pick it up again tomorrow. Nothing is so screamingly urgent that you can't do that. And that I've found makes it much easier to set healthy boundaries in terms of the amount that you're working. And there is often a lot to do, and people in the department work very hard. But I think the attitude of quality over urgency makes it much easier to get a better balance and to switch off when you feel like you really need to.
That's great, thank you. And Alice, would you agree with that? Is that something that kind of changes as you progress?
I think that's right. There are obviously, as Martha touched on, generally speaking, the deadlines are sort of soft deadlines. Where there are deadlines that need to be met, then those deadlines need to be met. So when you get to tax year end, or if someone phones and says, I'm in hospital, I need a will, you drop everything and you do that then, and it doesn't matter what time of day it is, because that is actually urgent and that's a real deadline. But those tend to be the only sorts of situations where that is the case. As Martha says, the team works incredibly hard, and there are times where you do need to set boundaries quite firmly with people, because as Martha said, there's, we work with lots of different partners, and so you need to be making sure that everybody's on the same page with how much is actually going on at any one time. But it is definitely the case that this is a very technical area of law. It is it is difficult, and it's not often the case that you'll be looking at exactly the same point more than once in the space of 6 months. And so you very often have to go back to the textbook or the legislation or whatever it is and sit and leaf through pages and pages and pages of law to work out what problem you're dealing with or whatever it might be. So that it does not lend itself to working very, very long hours, because you just can't, you just don't do the job properly. So I think work-life balance is something that people are focusing more on at the moment, and especially because private client has been one of the teams that's been super, super busy since the spring budget this year, so March, because of the announcements that were made about the abolishment of the non-dom regime and so on, which directly impact us and our clients. It has been super, super busy, and the partners have been very conscious of making sure that people are not overwhelmed. And it's sort of a two-way street. The partners are aware of it, but we also have to stick up for ourselves if we're getting a bit overloaded. And there is, I think, a strong culture here of looking out for each other. And, you know, if you notice somebody's working super late, you try and help them out and pick up stuff that you can. Yeah, not always possible to have a very sensible work-life balance throughout the year, especially when it comes to tax year end deadlines. But I think people are conscious of it, and it's certainly not bad, and I think it's getting better.
Great, thank you both so much. And someone in the audience has asked us whether you can share an example of how private client team collaborates across different practice areas. Do you ever work with the litigation team, corporate real estate, or tax team?
Yeah. So actually, on almost all my files, we work with other teams in the firm. I would say we probably work with tax, corporate tax the most, because a lot of the issues that we deal with, for example, if somebody is, say, leaving the UK and they are moving their business to somewhere else, then we need to, you know, what are the implications for the UK branch of the business? What are the implications for them if they're leaving? You know, even things like, you know, which flights can be deductible? Are they work flights? Can you do tax deductions? That sort of thing. Litigation, we also work with a lot, because it's often the case that we'll be working on, say, a family trust or a group of family trusts, and one of the beneficiaries will feel hard done by for whatever reason, and they'll want to see the trustees, and we'll then work with litigation. Or it's things like asking litigation to proofread documents with their litigation hats on, to make sure that if somebody is going to be difficult about a particular provision of a trust deed or a will or whatever it might be, that we've thought about how that's going to be dealt with, and, you know, included an extra line in the letter of wishes of the person who set up the trust to say, if this child causes trouble, I don't want you to give them anything, or whatever it might be. That's a silly example, but that sort of thing. We do work with corporate quite a lot, where we have clients who have businesses and there are restructurings or whatever it might be, or clients who are selling businesses, for example. There's a lot of crossover between us and corporate, where clients they've built up a business and now they want to exit. So we help with the tax planning, and the sort of succession planning, because that often means the client's coming into a lot of money, and so what do we do with it? How do we structure that? And then the obvious things like, you know, clients come into a lot of money, they want to buy a nice new house, so we speak to the private client property group and they will help with that. Anything else? I mean, I think that we work with almost every other team. For example, I've worked with funds, I've worked with derivatives and investment management, I've worked with all different types of litigation, you know, the sanctions team, insolvency team sometimes, if there's problems with funding trusts or whatever it might be. Unfortunately, the classic lawyer answer is it depends, but it's almost always the case that we have another team lined up to help with the different aspects of each file, because our work can cover almost everything to do with somebody's life. You know, if we help with the family office which has been set up by an entrepreneur, we then help that family office run the entire family's life, including wills for the children. I think one of our clients, the family office sets up dog walkers for the family members, so then we have to do the employment contracts for the dog walkers, and, you know, it can be almost anything.
Perfect, thank you. And you both mentioned the budget as well this afternoon. Alice, what other trends are impacting private client law, and how does this kind of impact the way that you advise clients, or your clients generally, and I guess the law firm itself?
One of the main trends we are seeing is basically it's like using technology to help make things easier, using AI or whatever it might be to help draft documents or make things quicker. Or we have for example, we have a law tech team who help with, if our clients need document management solutions, they will create a platform for the client to upload all their documents and keep everything in order. Or I think I'm stealing your one here, but where we have clients where, for example, they move abroad and you have to keep track of day counts, for example. You can only be in the UK for 90 days and then you have to be in wherever it is for X amount of days. Then our law tech teams help create portals to keep track of those days and upload evidence, because sometimes HMRC will query whether or not somebody is UK resident or not. And then you have to be able to provide evidence. So, asking the client to upload things like plane tickets, or in the extreme example, selfies of them being outside the UK, just to prove that they're outside the UK on a given day. That's the sort of thing we're seeing. We've also more on the AI side, seeing people asking questions. I mean, I have a client who, whenever we go and see them, will ask us a string of inordinately complicated questions about a particular type of thing that we've been speaking about, and then will admit sheepishly at the end of the conversation that he's put it all through ChatGPT, and that's where the questions have come from. And he's sort of getting us to check his homework, his ChatGPT homework, and he does it to us every time. Luckily, we've been right every time, and ChatGPT is not always right. So AI is a big one. I think, obviously digital assets is something that people see in the news all the time. It's not something I've dealt with that much in the last couple of years. I think there's been pretty big peaks and troughs in that. And we definitely do have clients with, huge holdings in, which insert name of relevant one, Bitcoin, whatever it might be. And there's lots of issues around moving assets around, with digital assets in particular. But again, that sort of goes up and down. AI is just going up and up and up. We're seeing it more and more. I think that's the main ones that I'm seeing, other than obviously the budget. Everyone's worried about the budget.
Yeah, of course. Perfect. It sounds like there's a ton of things to kind of have your finger on the pulse with. Martha, I don't know if there's anything in the tech space that you wanted to add there, but I also wondered whether you could talk to any strategies that you used as an applicant to help boost your knowledge in these sorts of areas of law. What did you do to help with your commercial awareness?
Yeah, I think commercial awareness, I remember as a law student and as an applicant, attending a lot of talks about commercial awareness and still coming away not fully understanding what it was supposed to mean. Is essentially understanding the context in which law firms are operating, and in order to it's about kind of building all of that background knowledge. So it's not necessarily having a really specialist kind of expertise knowledge of one particular area. It's about knowing the way that kind of corporate lawyers think, and the way that the clients are thinking, the way that they see the world, and the things that are important to them. And in order to do that, my strategy was to read something like the Financial Times, The Economist, get up to speed with business news, not necessarily so that in an interview you can spout off loads of facts like, oh, I saw all of these big deals that happened last week. It's not really about that, and probably whoever is interviewing you won't have read that story, won't know what you're talking about, and it kind of will mean nothing to them. But it's about the way of going about problems. It's about the way of looking at things, that I think the more that you read up, the more that you're kind of surrounding yourself by this. And to be honest, the more you're attending events like this and hearing from lawyers, the better that knowledge will be. Definitely the most you can do to fully understand what a lawyer actually does on a day-to-day basis, what they care about, what their clients care about, and how you can be a good lawyer when you get to that stage will really help you. So attending events like this, vacation schemes, other work experience opportunities are all excellent. There is nothing, I worked as a paralegal once I'd graduated. There is nothing like being in a law firm and seeing partners in action, seeing how law firms work, that will help you understand kind of what people are looking for when they are recruiting lawyers, because you understand what a lawyer actually does. For me, that is absolutely key.
Great, thank you. And Alice, would you say those trends kind of mean that private client is like a growing area of law, or how is the area growing, if it is?
Private client is one of those areas that is, I think I said earlier, is relevant to everyone, because it's the sort of, it sounds cliche and a bit lame, but like the two certainties is death and taxes, right? So everybody has to deal with those things. So I mean, it's a growing area in as much as things that were announced in the budget are going to start impacting more people than they do now. So for example, inheritance tax changes are going to impact a group of people that they previously wouldn't have impacted, and so more people are going to need advice, and it's going to be more sort of in the minds of the public that, you know, big tax changes, big inheritance tax changes for the farmers and businesses and all of these things that you will have seen in the news. It's growing in that sense. I think there's also I think there's a bigger focus on it because people are so conscious of things like tax avoidance and so on. Obviously, you know, nobody wants to see their name in the press as being a tax avoider. So people are very, very conscious that they want to get things absolutely right, and they want the right advice so that they don't, you know, tax law is horrifically complicated. And I'm sure it's entirely possible to get things wrong completely by accident just because you didn't know a rule existed, and people are becoming more and more conscious of that. And I think, you know, looking for advice early on so that they don't make mistakes. I mean, you know, the trends in technology, I don't think mean that the area is necessarily growing. It just means that the way we do our job is being shifted slightly, with more of a focus on relying on technology rather than relying on, you know, me sitting behind my desk staring at a textbook trying to understand what someone wrote in whatever 1837, the Wills Act, whatever it might be. And, you know, questions are coming up that we've not previously seen because our clients are putting them into ChatGPT. So you have to be quite prepared for almost any question under the sun. I think, yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't say it's a growing area of law in the sense that it was already massive and already relevant to almost everybody. As there is a sort of shift in generational wealth, as, you know, people's great parents and great grandparents and grandparents are dying and wealth is being shifted down generations to the younger generations, we're also seeing people, as I said earlier, with more of a focus on getting the tax right and making sure that everything is being done properly, and often trying to make their affairs less complicated, unwinding big offshore structures, because what's the point now? The rules have changed. They don't necessarily provide any benefit depending on the circumstances. That's the sort of thing we're seeing more and more. So it's a sort of a slight shift in possibly client base and method of working.
Thank you. Thanks, Alice. And Martha, just looking at the audience questions, and I thought this one might be nice for you to answer, seeing as you've done the process fairly recently. What would you say differentiates Macfarlanes from other firms?
Yeah, of course. And I will give this answer in two parts, both in terms of why I was applying to Macfarlanes and kind of what I said in my interview and stuff, and then kind of we can discover together whether or not I am still of that opinion, which, spoiler alert, yes I am. I chose Macfarlanes. It was one of the firms that I wanted to apply to because I wanted to become an expert in what I do. I wanted to work with people who are really good at their jobs. And I wanted to work in a firm that would provide me with very good quality training. And I think Macfarlanes is particularly good at that for a number of reasons in terms of the trainee experience. So the trainee cohort is much smaller than you might see at some of the really big kind of city firms. So there are 33 people, I think, per intake. So you get to know everyone in your intake very well, and you are not just kind of one of 100 other trainees, where kind of none of the associates in the team know your name, and you're just another pair of hands. You're just another resource for the kind of massive bundling tasks or other kind of administrative tasks. There is a real culture of recognizing that the trainees that are in the department now may be coming back and maybe a really good resource to the department in terms of their work as an associate, and then one day the trainees now are the partners of 10 years time or whatever. Is that is that a reasonable timeline? And you I think are really treated that way as a trainee. There is a lot of focus on your training and your development, and on making sure that you are getting as much out of it, out of your 6 months in a seat, as they are in terms of the work that you're doing for them. And I think that is really, really important. If you want to be a good lawyer, you have to train with a firm that will provide you with those skills and will allow you to work with the people who you will learn from. To be fair, I was also interested in private client as an kind of area of expertise when I was looking at law firms. So one thing that did really interest me about Macfarlanes was the private client department, how well respected they are, and how big the team is, and the kind of diversity of work. So I have always known that I wanted to try this out as a practice area, and Macfarlanes just have an absolutely excellent reputation in that field. So it's if any of the people watching this are interested in private client, I would say it's definitely worth. Obviously, I have to plug the firm because it's where we work, but I would say definitely try and attend more Macfarlanes events. Try and come and see the firm on a vacation scheme, because there is a lot of really, really interesting work to do, and a lot of people who are really engaged and who really care about doing really good work and about being as good as they can be, which is a really, really good motivation, especially in an area of law, city law, where you are going to be working really hard. It's really satisfying to be working with people who really care about doing a good job.
Thank you so much. That was lovely to hear and listen to, Martha. I think it would be useful to, you mentioned some of the key skills and the importance of kind of developing those. I think it would be useful to have a think about the key skills that aspiring lawyers should develop / provide evidence of when applying for Macfarlanes, for a training contract at Macfarlanes. Alice, do you have a list, maybe a top 3 skills that you think that they should be talking about and evidencing, and how can they evidence those skills?
It's a difficult question because everybody brings something different to the table. So, for example, no two partners are going to be the same, no two lawyers are going to be the same, and you're going to look for different skills in different people. What I would say is critical is things like, this is a sort of broad, applies to every lawyer point, but attention to detail is absolutely critical. If you're making mistakes in your applications, it's going to look bad and it's going to write you off immediately. And I say that as someone who made mistakes in applications and immediately got rejected. So I've learned this the hard way. But even in your working life, I get called up for typos, and it's mortifying and it's really irritating. And all it takes is checking the document one more time. that is an annoying but critical one. Being, again, you said this earlier, but being curious is one, because this work is hard. Being a lawyer is hard. It's difficult. The work is difficult. The law changes all the time. You have to want to know the answer. You have to find it interesting. You know, I used to work with a chap where I went and asked him a question about how to execute a deed. And it was a particularly niche question, and he got really excited about, oh, well, what are the requirements in this jurisdiction for executing this particular type of deed, and what are the consequences if we do it wrong? And he was unbelievably excited about what I thought was quite a boring question. Now I do get excited about trust deeds, but you know, not the execution thereof. So being interested in knowing the answer and doing the right and getting the right answer is very important. That's what a difficult one to evidence. But I think showing an interest in, you know, if you were to apply to Macfarlanes and said to recruitment, well, I'm interested in private client, then you need to be able to demonstrate that you are interested in private client, and you need to be able to say, well, why are you interested in private client? And, you know, how have you reached that decision? What about it makes it interesting to you? And do you understand what you're actually saying? Do you understand what you are getting yourself into, basically? And the other thing I think is being able to think quite critically and break down things into their individual components. And a lot of our job is basically looking at a situation and saying, well, how do we fix this? Or what's the issue and how do we fix it? Or what's the issue and what are the rules? How do the rules apply in this particular situation? Because it's not always going to be in textbook to give you the answer. There's not always going to be case law that deals with a particular question. And sometimes it's all a case of breaking down a situation into, you know, what is the problem that needs solving? What are the parameters and how do we fix it? So, you know, and it's not always a problem. Sometimes, you know, you just draft a will, but you need to look at the situation and look at the person and think, okay, well, you know, this person has got, say, 5 children. There are 2 different mothers. What are the problems that we might have to deal with here? And you can think outside of the box and, you know, what are the dynamics? What are the priorities of the client? You need to be thinking, and that's sort of what Martha was saying about commercial awareness. It's the thinking about what is it that we are providing, what service are we trying to provide to the client, and how do we get the best possible outcome for that client? And that is both a legal question and a sort of bigger picture question. I don't know how you would define that as a skill. I think that's one of them.
That sounds great, thank you. And I'm just conscious of time. We have a minute or less than. So I think it'd be quite nice just to really quickly, Martha, if you could give like one tip to those that are applying now.
Yeah, of course. So what Alice has said about demonstrating curiosity, demonstrating interest, attend as many events as possible, and don't be afraid to talk about events that you've attended in your applications. And even not just, say, for example, you could talk about this event not just in your application for Macfarlanes, but if you're talking in other contexts about your interest in private client as a practice area, speak to as many people as possible, try and have in-person interactions, and that can be quite scary sometimes, but that is really helpful, because in an interview you are going to be speaking to people who know loads about whatever it is that you're speaking to them about, and getting comfortable as well as actually getting kind of all of that knowledge from people will really, really help. I would say demonstrating resilience is also really important. Like Alice has said, the work is very difficult. Your job as a trainee is going to be really difficult, and it will not only make your application better, but it will also make your life easier once you actually start as a trainee. Start thinking about how can I make things better for me when I start working, and that mindset will also help with the application process, because you're getting into the mindset of a trainee.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you for taking part today. We've hit 2 o'clock, so that is the end. And thank you so much to the audience for your questions and for joining us. We hope that you found this session useful. To finish off, we're just going to launch one last poll, hopefully, if I can. Can I see it? Yes. just to find out what you learned from today. So it's just up on the screen. So what is your key takeaway from today's session? And whilst you're doing that, just another reminder to attendees that we will be sending out a link containing the recorded session, so please do keep an eye out for that. And a survey will also be popping up once the masterclass has ended, so fill that out and let us know how you enjoyed today and what other topics you would like us to cover going forward. And remember just to check out all of our upcoming masterclasses on the events page on Law CareersNet. As a reminder, we will be running more masterclass in the new year, including one for non-law students on the 22nd of January. And we'll also have several masterclasses with BPP University as well, from SQE, Funding Legal Studies and Tips for Boosting Commercial Awareness. Just going to end this poll. So it seems that lots of you learned about what lawyers in this practice area do, gaining valuable insight into the practice area and more about Macfarlanes, which is great. So fantastic news. And just, thank you once again to our panellists and to everyone attending today. Look forward to seeing you again next time.